Jaya Radha Madhava
God. So
Kunjabi.
get to the technology of life. Let's start
I think
with
the creamery has their mic on.
yeah.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Bhaja Jana Lanjana Yashoda Nandana Bhaja Jana Lanjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Givaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajanarandana Yashodanandana Brajajanarandana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachasi Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hati Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hati Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Bhajajana Jana Yashoda Nandana Bhajajana Nandana Yamuna Tira Pavanachar Yamuna Tira Pavanachar Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Rama Jai Jai Prabhu Prabhu Prabhupada Prabhupada Jai Jai Prabhu Jai Jai Prabhupada 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 Jai Jai Prabhupada Prabhupada Paramsa Parijakachaya Shota Shota Shishimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai His Confounder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jam Vishnupada Paramsa Parijakachaya Ashota Shota Shri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Nitai Gaur Pranande Haribol Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 1, titled The Activities of Maharaj Priyavata, text number 31. Yeva uhatad rata charananimi krita parikatas te sapta sindava asan yata eva krita sapta bhuvo dwipa. Yeva uhatad rata charananimi krita parikatas te sapta sindava asan yat eva krita sapto bhuva dwipa. Yeva uha tad reta charananimi krita parikatas te sapta sindava asan yata eva krita sapta bhuvo dwipa. Yea, that. Va uha, certainly. Pat reta, of his chariot. Charana, of the wheels. Nemi, by the rims. Krita, made. Parikata, trenches. Te, those. Sapta, 7. Sindava, oceans. Asan, became. Yata, because of which. Eva, certainly. Krita, were made. Sapta, 7. Bhuva, of the Bhu-Mandala. Vipa, islands. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. When Priyavata drove his chariot behind the sun, the rims of his chariot wheels and created impressions that later became seven oceans, dividing the planetary systems known as Bhu-Mandala into seven islands. Purport. Sometimes the planets in outer space are called islands. We have experience of various types of islands in the ocean, and similarly, the various planets divided into 14 lokas are islands in the ocean of outer space. As Priyavata drove his chariot behind the sun, he created seven types of oceans and planetary systems, which altogether are known as Bhu-Mandala or Bhuloka. In the Gayatri mantra, we chant Om Bhurva Svatat Savitur Varenam. Above the Bhuloka planetary system is Bhuvarloka, and above that is Svargarloka, the heavenly planetary system. All these planetary systems are controlled by Savita, the sun god. By chanting the Gayatri mantra just after rising early in the morning, one worships the sun god. Om Aginatara Mandasya, Ginanjana Shalakaya, Chakshmalitamyana, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhara, Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, in this verse, we have what would be considered today a astronomical impossibility. Priyavata, following the course of the sun, made seven oceans and divided the planetary system known as Bhu-Mandala, or the earthly planetary system, into seven islands, which we'll actually read about later in the fifth canto. There's a lot of detail that goes into the descriptions of Bhu-Mandala in the later chapters of this canto. And then also in the purport, Prabhupada mentions different planetary systems, which is, for example, Bhuvarloka and Svargarloka. We know, of course, also there are other higher planetary systems like Tapaloka, Janaloka, Brahmaloka. And it can be somewhat confusing or easy to gloss over these cosmographical and cosmological descriptions. And these statements and other statements in the as Vedic literatures, you could say, could be part of what could be what was known as the Yotish Shastra, Yotisha Shastra, the descriptions of the universe in terms of its shape, size, etc. Much of the Yotish Shastra is not known to us today. It was lost to history or became unmanifest or unrevealed. So there are really two schools or two types of views, historically speaking, or if one looks in the texts on cosmography, on the structure of the universe. There is the Puranic cosmography, such as the type described in the Srimad Bhagavatam, also known as the Bhagavat Purana. And in this cosmography, the universe is very small, actually, comparatively speaking. Actually, on the order of what modern measurements put the solar system as, about to the orbit of Uranus. Uh, if one looks at, for example, the descriptions later in the fifth canto, the farthest reaches of the universe only go about that far. While the Siddhantic uh, viewpoint or the Siddhantic literatures, such as Surya Siddhanta, are a lot closer to what is observed by the eye and by modern science, and can actually be used to calculate different quantities with reasonable precision. This was shown in a 1997 paper by Sadaputta Prabhu, where you can actually use the methods of the Siddhantic literatures to calculate the diameters of various planets. This is also, uh, or especially interesting, because it refutes the uh, historical or the idea of some Indologists that all of this planetary knowledge was in India because somebody, some flunker or a trader from the West, brought books by Ptolemy uh, to India, and that's at least the story that they say is that these Siddhantic literatures are really just plagiarism or uh, copies of the works of Ptolemy. But what's interesting is that, and once again, you can find this in Sadhaputta Prabhu's paper, which you can find on sadhaputta.com or richardlthompson.com, uh, which are the digital archives of his work. Uh, he shows that actually Ptolemy gets the planetary diameters wrong, where the Sirius Siddhanta uh, gets it correct, or where the Siddhantic literature gets it correct, rather. So it shows that there is actually more going on than what the modern Indologists say, that everything, which is basically more or less that everything of value comes from Greece. Uh, but still, there's this tension or apparent disagreement between the Puranic and Siddhantic uh, views of cosmography, the views of what the shape and structure, distances in the universe are. Uh, and there's been various approaches to interpreting these things, uh, especially in the vertical direction. Uh, Generally, people, I mean, devotees, either when they're trying to look at things mathematically or in other ways, they either focus on the vertical direction, so going up to the different planetary systems, or the horizontal direction, which is, of course, Bhu-Mandala. Uh, Much more work has been done in the vertical direction rather than the horizontal direction, simply because it's easier to understand and to get some comparisons with. But there's been various approaches to Quranic cosmography, especially in the vertical direction. Some just take the distances as they are, so that when it says something is so and so miles or yojanas away, they just say that that is what it is, uh, and that there's no discussion for anything else, which doesn't leave a lot of room for future work, of course, or for any sort of potential correlations. And is, of course, not what we see in the night sky. Uh, that it, as I mentioned earlier, creates a very small universe. The other, of course, interpretation is that there are distances, these are distances as experienced by yogis or other advanced beings who have the ability to travel in ways that we do not. Um, so a yogi can do things. So one who has the yogic cities can do things that are normally considered impossible. For example, in a purport in Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada says that a yogi can reach out and touch the moon. Uh, of course, one would not expect to see, even if a yogi is touching the moon through his mystic power, one would not expect to see a hand reaching out through the sky with a millions of miles or thousands of miles long arm to reach the distance from here to the moon. One expects that there is some other process by which uh, they are some other path by which they are reaching their hand out to touch the moon planet. Of course, the kind of widely accepted uh, interpretation of this is that it is describing higher dimensional realities or higher dimensional substances. Uh, so there are multiple ways to look at this. Either that uh, these advanced beings who go by the Puranic cosmology or by the Puranic uh, structure of the universe are able to move in ways that we are not. Uh, so if for us ordinary human beings, we can move in three dimensions: front, back, left, right, up, down. But it is possible, of course, that higher dimensional beings, or that these more elevated beings on these other planetary systems, or by practice of yoga, can move in a fourth, fifth, sixth way, rather than the three uh, ways that we are able to. And of course, this leads to ideas of connectedness, so kind of a more topological definition of dimension. Sariputta Prabhu talks about this in Vedic cosmology and astronomy, or sorry, Vedic cosmography and astronomy, uh, where he discusses where this idea of dimensionality is related to the connectedness of a space. So if I view the space as a grid, so as discrete, so just think of as a bunch of dots rather than as a continuous space, then in two dimensions you have four neighbors, just going by the cardinal directions. In uh, three dimensions, you would have six. In four dimensions, you would have eight, etc. So the connectedness or the points, the number of points you are connected to uh, is increasing. So one in Vedic cosmography and astronomy, Prabhu makes the point that one can extend this all the way up to Krishna, who is infinitely connected. Of course, Krishna is at every point in every universe and in every atom. So, in that interpretation of dimension, one could say that Krishna is living in an infinite dimensional sort of reality. There are also other approaches to Puranic cosmography, such as astrolabe-like models, where we don't really have to worry about height, and then some other understandings of distance, which tends to elude any sort of empirical investigation. So all of these mm, approaches, while of course are uh, interesting in their own rights and might lead to further insights, many of them are very qualitative. They don't actually have measurement behind them. So I want to talk some about, in our remaining time, some research that has been done by some devotees at the Bhaktivedanta Institute. Uh, I did not do this specific research. This is based on, what I'm talking about is going to be based on a paper by Dwija Govinda Prabhu and Sukumari Sundari Prabhu, uh, who are both researchers with the Bhaktivedanta Institute. And basically, so they have a paper that you can find on the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies website called a proportionality approach to the relevance of height in the Puranic cosmos. Uh, and the paper, if anybody is interested, is reasonably accessible to even people who do not necessarily have a strong mathematical background. Uh, if anybody wants to check it out later. Uh, so in this work, they develop an approach to reconciling Puranic cosmography, which is what we see in the Bhagavatam, with the Siddhantic cosmology, which is close, uh, or cosmography, which is close to what we see in the sky, and is close to what is actually measured by even by modern standards. Uh, so the first thing they discuss is, or one aspect that is important of what they discuss, is the length of the yojana. So, of course, the descriptions in both the uh, Puranic and Siddhantic viewpoints are given in yojanas, which is the standard unit of length for astronomical, at least for astronomical studies uh, at that time. So, but uh, if one uses the same length for both the Puranic distances and the Siddhantic distances, one gets a one gets different mm, descriptions and different lengths. Uh, so one has to be careful with the definition of the yojana. The best scholarship on this point says that the Puranic yojana, the measurement of the yojana in the Srimad Bhagavatam, is equivalent to about 8 miles. Some say 8.5, but eight is the measurement which fits most things and is given by uh, and was the measurement given by Srila Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. While the Siddhantic measurements, such as those found in the series Siddhanta, are actually equivalent, if one looks at observations, to 5 miles. So this, when going in between the Puranic and Siddhantic uh, viewpoints, gives actually some proportionality constants. Of course, there'll sometimes be a factor of 5/8 in some cross calculations if one is comparing them. And another proportionality constant that is derived by the proportion of the sodontic diameter of the universe to the Puranic diameter of the universe, which works out to be approximately 7.5 million. So if one takes these proportionality constants and applies them to the distances as given in the Puranic literatures, as in the Srimad Bhagavatam, uh, one actually gets things that are close to the Siddhantic and to the actual modern uh, distances that are measured. So, for example, in the paper that I mentioned and that I'm taking this from, they do a calculation of the distance to Saptarishi, the constellation of the seven sages, which is Ursa Major or the Big Dipper. And if one goes through this calculation using the derived proportionality constants and the distance given in the Srimad Bhagavatam, one gets 26.2 light years. The modern comparison is about 46 light years, which at first glance does not seem like they agree. But if one, it does seem like a very large difference, about 1.75 times the estimated distance to Saptarishi. However, uh, this is actually very close for uh, astronomical values because of the distances and size of the objects described. There is a bit more leeway for what is considered within agreement. So 26.2 and 45.9, if both made by modern cosmologists, would actually be considered to be in agreement. And if one is interested, one can look at the paper for comparisons of uh, other lokas, other places in the that compare the Puranic cosmography to the modern cosmographical measurements. And in all of the cases that they compared, they're within astronomical uncertainties. So they're within agreements, within the accepted norms of the field of observational astronomy. Uh, and uh, there's actually another interesting aspect to this paper based on proportionality, which has to do with time dilation. So we, of course, read that time moves differently in different planetary systems, and the length of uh, the life of the inhabitants of those um, lokas have different values. So in some lokas, one lives very long times, and in others, they live very short amount of times, relatively speaking. Uh, so one can, if one wants to study this in terms of proportionality, one could make the ansatz or the assumption or the guess that there's some sort of proportionality that such that the lifespan in terms of earthly years is inversely proportional to the distance of the mm, loka above the Earth planet. So that one can calculate it in these ways. Of course, the question is then what does one, uh, and the reason for this, for kind of looking at it this way, is that the Puranas describe uh, that those in higher planets have more freedom of movement uh, around the universe as a whole. So that instead of being, many millions or billions of light years across, it might appear a lot smaller. Uh, for example, as I was saying, to the diameter of Uranus, uh, or to the diameter of the orbit of Uranus, rather, uh, such that it is a lot easier to navigate. So, in this paper, these Prabhus calculate this based on two reference points. Uh, one is Brahmaloka and the other is Maharloka. And in both of these, one gets the radius of the universe according to these to be uh, consistent with distances to known astronomical uh, mm, landmarks, I guess you could say. For example, if one takes the reference point of this proportionality to be Brahmaloka, uh, and this choice is somewhat natural since it has been suggested by some people that the Puranas describe the universe from the viewpoint of a resident of Brahmaloka, uh, at least as far as cosmographical uh, and cosmographical description. Then on the Earth level, the radius of the universe would be about to the Sloan Great Wall, which is the largest known supercluster of galaxies, uh, which form what is kind of referred to as a wall uh, in space, and is one of the largest known structures. And if one looks at uh, if one instead takes the comparison to Maharloka, uh, then the diameter of the universe reaches to approximately the center of the Milky Way galaxy. So nobody really knows what to make of these, but it is an interesting argument or an interesting comparison. So why did I go over all of this mathematics? Um, so the reason is kind of to point out or to highlight that one is not stuck with just qualitative uh, interpretations of the Quranic cosmos, uh, of the descriptions of Srimad Bhagavatam, where we have to necessarily appeal to different dimensions or different understandings of distance. One can actually take a uh, quantitative approach where one can actually use the Puranic cosmology to calculate things, and that one doesn't have to regale these parts to the part of the mind which deals with philosophy or mythology or non-rational subjects. So I just thought it would be interesting for devotees to hear also some of the uh, analysis that has been done in this regard. Of course, there's still a lot more to do, uh, both in the vertical dimension and even more in the horizontal dimension or the horizontal direction. So we have not solved the mysteries of the Vedic universe yet, but there are approaches being considered. So I talked a lot about various things and different perspectives. Hopefully it was somewhat clear. So are there any questions or comments about this? It's nobody into cosmology. Saratma says, thank you for the unfettered access to the nerd world. No problem. If anybody is interested in looking at more research that is being done by the Bhaktivedanta Institute, one can go to bihstudies.org, which is the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies website, and read the papers there. There's a research tab, which has some papers, and then, of course, links to other such things. Most of the papers there are pretty readable, mine, of course, being the exception. All right, any other comments, questions?
Bhu, that was VIHstudies.org.
Yes.
Okay. I have a few comments I could contribute.
Sure.
If I can gather my thoughts here. Prabhupada makes reference to the Gayatri mantra, and says that early in the morning is all he says. More specifically, everyone is familiar with the Brahma Muhurta, which begins an hour and 36 minutes prior to the sunrise. So a Muhurta is a unit of time. The Brahma Muhurta is a specific Muhurta, and a Muhurta is comprised of two dandas. Danda is 24 minutes. So the sanyas, there are three sanyas in the day. The Gayatri mantra is chanted at the sanyas, and a sanya, the morning sanya is a period of 48 minutes. It's a muhurta, which extends 24 minutes either side of the sunrise, 24 minutes before, 24 minutes afterwards. So in the morning, ideally, the Gayatri mantra is chanted during the sanya, so that, and the sanya begins 24 minutes prior to the sunrise and continues for another 24 minutes after the sunrise. Similarly, the noon sanya begins 24 minutes prior to the sun's actual zenith in the sky, and then extends for 24 minutes after that. And when the sun sets in the evening, the Sanya begins 24 minutes prior to the sunset and extends another 24 minutes after the sunset. So the ideal is that the Gayatri mantras are chanted during the Sanya. Srila Prabhupada never stressed this. He would instruct you, you chant Gayatri morning, noon, and evening. But traditionally, this is how it was done, always during the Sanya. And in India, for ages, people would tend to always know more or less when the Sanyas were, because being tropical or subtropical India, people spend a lot of time outdoors. They're outside most of the time. So they're very aware of what's happening in the sky. They know when the sun rises and sets. They know when the full moon is, and, so they're aware of the Purnima. And so, for example, Srila Prabhupada advised us to, when he was instructing us to shave our heads once in a fortnight, we more often than not failed to do that, and he was quite upset about that. So he modified his instruction. He said, all right, then if you can't do that, then at least once in a month on the Purnima, because that way you won't forget. You'll see the full moon and you'll know, all right, it's time to shave my head. But here in the West, we spend a great deal of time indoors. We tend not to be very conscious of what's happening in the sky. Anyway, so that's the Sanya's. Reference is made to this in the Gurvashtakam. Tri Sandhyam is mentioned. Dhyayam Stuvam Stasya Yasyas Tri Sandhyam. So we offer our respects to the Guru 3 times a day. It's at the Sanyas by the Gayatri mantra. The first line of Gayatri is worshiping the sun, and next 2 lines of Gayatri are worshiping the Guru, then Lord Chaitanya, and so on. Anyway, there is a, never mind, that's not important. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur had some interesting comments on today's shloka and also yesterday's shloka. Beginning with yesterday's shloka, he said something which struck me. Most of his commentary is similar to what Srila Prabhupada states in his purport. But at the end of his commentary, he says, where is it now? He makes reference to Priyavrata's creation of another sun, a chariot actually, that brilliant like the sun, and depending upon the time of year, it would be either warmer or cooler than the original sun. And so in connection with this, he says, this means that by the power of yoga of sages like Subari, Priyavrata had 2 bodies, one as the king and one as the son that he created. So he actually expanded himself into 2 separate personalities, according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. For today's verse, I'll just read this. It's a lengthy paragraph, but it's not too lengthy. It says the movement of the wheel of King Priyavrata's chariot produced troughs, which became 7 oceans. This means that he had 7 chariots, each with 1 wheel, by the power of his yoga. This their movement was higher than the sun's, and they circled around the plane of the earth. Jiva Goswami says in the Sandarbha that one should understand that the chariots were successively larger and larger in size, since the outer circles were larger and larger. Some say that he made larger and larger chariots in succession, each one twice the size of the previous one, traveling higher and higher, so that the inhabitants of his city in Aryavarta could see his chariot even at a great distance. Because the wheels of each chariot were broader than the previous ones, the oceans were successively broader. He rode each of these 7 chariots for 25 days and 45 and a half gatikas each, totaling half a year, starting with the summer equinox, with the sun gradually descending until Pausha month. Then again, starting from the winter equinox, he would travel until the cycle was completed, with the same number of days fixed, but with the opposite order of chariots, with the sun gradually ascending until Ashada month. As the sun traveled around Meru clockwise, along with the dependent zodiac, it gradually increased in speed. And thus, the days after the summer equinox become shorter each month. And from the winter equinox, the sun gradually slowed down and the days become longer. In order to decrease the night, Priyavrata, by his own will, circled Meru. But slowing down his chariot increased the length of the days after the winter equinox, and then decreased the length of the days according to his will by speeding up his chariot. By the power of yoga, his chariots were visible or invisible according to the time. Thus, 7 times in the previous verse means that he traveled in 7 chariots in the manner described above. There is no contradiction, since it is not proper to say that Priyavrata stopped perusing the sun after only 7 days, and some say he did not give up this activity. Because of these 7 oceans, Yataha, 7 continents formed. So that's clear, right? I'm joking, of course.
Yeah.
I am frankly confounded by all these things. You might be able to wrap your head around it, but my eyes just glaze over, and I just accept it, but I don't understand it necessarily. So, but anyway, it's interesting. He has some additional details not touched on by Srila Prabhupada, and I thought you might find that interesting. And that's all I've got. Thank you for your class today. It was especially interesting. I'm glad that it was your turn to give class today, and you were able to address these issues that otherwise would be inaccessible for me, at least, but you made it a little bit more understandable. And I was interested to hear your comments about the Bhaktivedanta Institute and their findings, and the explanation of the 2 different views of the Vedic cosmology. Sariputta had explained these things to me once upon a time, but I once again, my eyes glazed over and I couldn't really follow everything he was saying. I was his cook for a period of time, and housekeeper when he was working as a professor in Binghamton. So he was researching these things at the time and had lots of comments that he would bounce off myself and others. There were a few of us that he was renting a house, so we made a temple out of it. And my job was to keep him fit, which was a project. He ate quite well, but so he had a lot to say about these things. I remember him talking about yoginas and trying to reconcile the different understandings of a yogina. And as I recall, he explained it maybe 3 or 4 different ways.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of questions, and between himself and some other individuals who were doing similar research, there was not necessarily agreement. There was some contention over some issues, but it seemed like no one was really quite sure what to think, at least at that point in time, which was in the late 70s, early 80s, I guess. Things, I'm sure, developed considerably since that time. But it certainly left me confused. Anyway, I'm glad we have you here to help us out with all of this. Maybe, well, it would probably be nice if you could give maybe a few more classes during the week, because I think some of us might have a lot of trouble with some of this. All right. Anyway, I'll shut up. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yes, it can be a bit confusing, even to people who are kind of trained in science, mathematics, etc. And as I mentioned, I really just talked about the vertical direction today. The trying to understand the horizontal direction. So the descriptions of Bhu-Mandala is an even more difficult endeavor. So if anybody wants a mathematical challenge, one can attempt to do something similar with Bhu-Mandala. But yeah, I thought it was interesting the points that you brought out about how people knew these astronomical signs or astronomical calculations. Whereas, of course, we don't, because we spend a lot of time inside, especially during the night. And I was thinking, if one lives in a city, one can also not see a lot of stars because of the light pollution that is present there. But I also had the reflection that, or that, in previous times, for example, in previous yugas, we can see that this was somewhat, that knowing how to do these calculations to calculate certain events or timings was expected to be somewhat common knowledge. One example that comes to mind is Nanda Maharaj. We of course know the pastime where he took a bath at the wrong time to at the end of the Ekadashi. So he was arrested by the uh, deputies of Varuna, which implies that he was expected to know how to calculate the correct time to perform his religious duties at the end of an Ekadashi. And we don't necessarily find that Nanda Maharaj was an expert on Jyotisha Shastra. So it seems to imply that in previous yugas, these calculations were commonplace to be known, at least by the higher castes, um, by the twice-born people. Uh, so yes, and takes a lot of work to do. So, like I said, if anybody's interested in these things, one can look at the Bhaktivedanta Institute website or sadhaputa.com, which is Sadhaputta Prabhu's digital archives, which has most of the things that he's written, at least devotional things. Uh, so if there are no more questions or comments, nobody uh, gestures wildly electronically in the next few seconds, I will just say I'll end here. So Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai.
Question. We do it now. I'm sure we're running out of time, but just read through the explain the connectedness point about space again. We just thought of presenting this one as well. How you can reach out
Yeah,
and grab something.
yeah. So basically, the idea is just that space is more connected. Right, so that the kind of the way that he imagines it, or the space is that so instead of having in your space, you have a grid, right? It's just like points in the grid. So according to normal kind of vision, right? If I'm on a square grid, right, so two-dimensional, then I have this way and this way. So I'm connected. If I'm on a three-dimensional grid, I was connected to 6 points. But there's a possibility that I'm connected that way, but I can also reach out and grab a point over there. So there's a non-trivial kind of connectedness to the space. So that I don't have to reach through the intervening points, like the point that's directly connected to my point.
Filling space and empty.
Yeah, that's one way.
Depending on sort of global consciousness, we can make this
Different points. Yeah, and then Sadhguru Prabhu and Veda cosmography and astronomy says it's the logical conclusion of Krishna's that everyone. Yeah, so infinite dimension.
Yeah, it's you could really apply that to a lot of different things, like how say the guru might not be omniscient, but he can know whatever he needs to know. Krishna empowering him, right? So he might know something about physics, for example, even though he never had the training for it, right?
Yeah,
Krishna wants him to know. He can just empower him.
yeah, yeah. The guru knows everything that Krishna wants to know. So yeah, about physics, cosmography, anything.
There's no such thing as a vacuum.
Well, I mean, even in so, like if you look at the description of the elements, right? There's ether,
Yeah.
which in the West, there's the lunar nepheros that fills an empty so-called space.
In the West, what?
There's the concept of luminescence, so which gave the medium for which light travel. That of course was done away with during the start of 20th century.
So I was saying that's essentially substance.
In it, yeah. And then the Michelson Morley experiments purported to disprove that. It's in another way kind of making a comeback. What's called superfluid vacuum theory, where space either is or is filled with a superfluid, so a fluid with zero viscosity, or some people say very high viscosity. So,
A boomerang, fashion for fashion.
yeah, that's silence. Yeah.
Pariksha Amapajami Pariksha Amapajami
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Jai Guru Sahasranam. Bhakti Jaya Vidya Sada.
No, чаще всего Ramsey короче, что там его looked at me and she later, whenever she was at the room, he died. Possibility the possibility the community the money. I put on the just the government, the just keep the value. Another good version of the she very nice and keep the revenue. Let the good criminally all coincidence somebody really is. All coincidence somebody really is. All coincidence somebody really is. All boys are she, you and she, another all boys. I see the many connection. Words, universe, spirituality, one way that we can feel devotion skills. Bow down from God, speak in the phone. So it's like it's such emotional feel suffering and pain and suggestion. I wish it might come, see purified by the world in the name of the soul. Attachment to love and sweet and through fashionable begins all the time, which is going in your name. I am the perfect transit. Feel my love. Looking at steady for images, and even if it's historical, the living scripture said this term. Now spiritual masters rather the poor one will not know the tools. Master please be merciful unto us and expect all through these. Take shelter. Aye. Становится, надо вас представить, как видите. Хорошо? Неплохо. Ее стирать надо? А? Стирать ее что? Если сегодня еще нужно будет, то не надо, если уже... Если у нас в следующий раз, то стираем. Следующий, да. То есть, каждое утро ее стирать дальше. Одеваешь, чисто сам. Я могу. Сутки она чистая, считаю. После этого надо стирать, хорошо. Теоретически, если вы повесите в чистое место, то... Да это повешу, только я на нее ее больше давать не буду. Я имею в виду, что даже еще утром ее можно теоретически надеть. Ну, понятно, стоит. 24 часа, ну все, хорошо. Я думал, как бы это, постоянно нет. Ну что, представляю.